Welcome back to the Cartoon Codex. Tonight, we're diving deep into the twisted, hilarious, and surprisingly complex world of Family Guy. This isn't just another surface-level recap. We're exploring the hidden histories, the forgotten backstories, and the intricate lore that makes Quahog, Rhode Island, one of the most bizarrely detailed fictional towns in animated television. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's unravel decades of Griffin family secrets, town legends, and the strange evolution of a show that's been making audiences laugh and cringe for over 20 years. The story of Family Guy doesn't begin with Peter Griffin stumbling through his living room or Stewie plotting world domination. It starts in the mind of a young animator named Seth MacFarlane, sitting in a dorm room at the Rhode Island School of Design in the mid-1990s, and MacFarlane was working on his thesis film, a short animated piece called The Life of Larry. This wasn't just some student project he threw together. It was the foundation for everything that would come after. The Life of Larry featured a middle-aged man named Larry Cummings, a character who looked nothing like the Peter Griffin we know today. Larry had white hair, male pattern baldness, and a significantly slimmer build than Peter's iconic rotund figure. But Larry had something important. He had a wife named Lois, a slob of a teenage son, and most crucially, he had a highly intelligent talking dog. The pieces were already falling into place, even if MacFarlane didn't know it yet. After The Life of Larry caught the attention of Hanna-Barbera, MacFarlane created a follow-up short in 1996 called Larry and Steve, and this one featured the same basic setup but refined the characters further. Larry and his brainy dog Steve were broadcast on Cartoon Network's world premiere Toons in 1997, and that's when Fox executives took notice. They saw something in these shorts that they believed could compete with The Simpsons, which had dominated animated sitcoms for nearly a decade. Fox gave MacFarlane $50,000 and told him to create a 15-minute pilot. This is where things get interesting from a creative standpoint. MacFarlane didn't just rehash Larry and Steve, he completely redesigned them. Larry became Peter, taking on a more rounded physique, glasses, and that distinctive Rhode Island accent. Steve became Brian, maintaining his intelligence but gaining a more cynical, world-weary personality, and the transformation was deliberate and calculated. MacFarlane knew he needed characters that could sustain a full series, not just a few short films. The voice work for Peter came from an unexpected source. While attending the Rhode Island School of Design, MacFarlane would overhear security guards talking as he worked late into the night. Their thick New England accents, their unfiltered way of speaking, and their tendency to say whatever came to mind without any self-editing mechanism fascinated him. He started imitating these voices, practicing them until he had Peter's distinctive vocal pattern down perfectly. Years later, MacFarlane would say he knew 1,000 Peter Griffins growing up in New England, guys who would speak before thinking, whose personalities were shaped by blue-collar work, beer, and an almost childlike enthusiasm for life. Family Guy premiered on January 31st, 1999, right after Super Bowl 33. This wasn't an accident. Fox gave the show the best possible launch platform, knowing that millions of viewers would stick around to see what came after the game. The pilot episode, titled Death Has a Shadow, introduced audiences to the Griffin family in their home at 31 Spooner Street in the fictional town of Quahog, Rhode Island. Peter loses his job, lies to Lois about it, receives a welfare check by mistake, and the chaos spirals from there. It was crude, irreverent, and completely different from anything else on television at the time. The show's early success was undeniable, but it was also precarious. Fox executives weren't entirely sure what they had on their hands. The humor was edgier than The Simpsons, pushing boundaries that mainstream network television rarely crossed. The cutaway gags, which would become Family Guy's signature style, were experimental at first. The writers didn't know if audiences would accept jokes that had nothing to do with the main plot, random references to pop culture moments, or flashbacks to historical events that never happened, but were hilarious to imagine. By the end of the second season, Fox announced Family Guy's cancellation. Then they changed their minds and ordered a third season. Then they cancelled it again in 2002. The show seemed destined to be a footnote in animation history, a brief experiment that pushed too hard against the boundaries of acceptable network comedy. But something unexpected happened. Adult Swim started airing Family Guy reruns late at night, and suddenly the show found its audience. College students and young adults who had missed it during its original run discovered it and fell in love with its anarchic humor. DVD sales exploded, moving over 2.2 million copies in a single year. Fox executives noticed. In 2004, they did something almost unprecedented in television history. They brought Family Guy back from cancellation. The show returned to production, and this time it wasn't going anywhere. The resurrection of Family Guy marked a turning point, not just for the series itself, but for how networks thought about animated programming. It proved that adult animation could thrive if given the right platform and the right audience. Peter Griffin, a man of many mysteries. Peter Lowenbroy. Griffin's life story reads like a collection of contradictions, half-truths, and genuinely bizarre revelations that only make sense in the chaotic world of Family Guy. He wasn't born in Quahog, Rhode Island, despite spending his entire adult life there. He was born in Mexico City, Mexico, under circumstances that tell you everything you need to know about the show's willingness to push boundaries into uncomfortable territory. Peter's mother, Thelma Griffin, traveled to Mexico seeking an abortion. This isn't played for laughs or treated lightly in the way the show handles it. Instead, it becomes a fundamental part of Peter's origin story. During the abortion procedure, something went wrong, or perhaps went right depending on your perspective. Peter was born instead of being terminated. Thelma took her unexpected newborn back to Rhode Island, where she and her husband Francis Griffin raised him as their own son. For years, Peter believed Francis was his biological father. Growing up in a strict Irish Catholic household that shaped much of his early worldview. The revelation of Peter's true parentage comes later in the series, and it's a moment that actually adds unexpected depth to his character. Francis Griffin, the man who raised Peter, was cold, judgmental, and deeply religious. He constantly criticized Peter, telling him he'd never amount to anything, that he was a disappointment to the family and to God. Their relationship was fractured and painful, with Francis showing more contempt than love toward the son he supposedly raised. When Francis dies in a freak accident caused inadvertently by Peter, the truth comes out. Francis wasn't Peter's biological father at all. Mickey McFinnigan is Peter's real father, a perpetually drunk Irishman who looks remarkably similar to Peter, just with a massive red beard and an even more pronounced alcohol dependency. Mickey represents everything that Peter could have become if circumstances had been different. He's the town drunk, stumbling through life without purpose or direction, defined entirely by his relationship with alcohol, and his inability to take anything seriously. The fact that Mickey is Peter's biological father raises questions about nature versus nurture. Did Peter inherit his childish behavior and poor decision-making from Mickey? Or was he shaped by growing up under Francis's harsh judgment, developing his immature coping mechanisms as a defense against constant criticism? Peter's birth certificate lists his name as Justin Peter Griffin, adding another layer of confusion to his identity. His middle name, Lowenbräu, comes from a German beer brand, which is fitting given Peter's love of drinking. The certificate shows he was born in Quahog, not Mexico City, suggesting that Thelma falsified his birth records when she brought him back to the United States. This makes Peter an illegal immigrant, a fact that becomes a plot point in one episode when he's forced to take a citizenship test, despite having lived in America his entire life. The Griffin family tree extends back through centuries of history, and nearly every ancestor Peter has is either remarkable, terrible, or both. Moses Griffin, according to family law, was the man who parted the Red Sea and led the Jews out of Egypt. He allegedly wrote the 10 Commandments, including that memorable 11th commandment that people always forget about billboards. King Arthur Griffin pulled Excalibur from the stone in medieval times, though his version of the Arthurian legend is significantly less noble than traditional tellings. Ponce de Leon Griffin searched for the Fountain of Youth during the Age of Exploration. Moving forward through history, Peter's ancestors get progressively stranger and more disturbing. Nathaniel Griffin, Peter's great-great-great-great-grandfather, was a black slave who belonged to the Pewterschmidt family, working as their stable boy. The show reveals that Nathaniel secretly had relationships with members of the Pewterschmidt family and is credited with creating the Department of Motor Vehicles, which explains a lot about why the DMV functions the way it does. Ulysses S. Griffin, Peter's great-great-uncle, supposedly ended the Civil War not through military strategy, but by defeating Robert E. Lee in a beer drinking contest. They compromised that slavery would end, but that freed slaves wouldn't have to learn to read. The more recent Griffin ancestors are equally problematic. Josiah Griffin helped design Bugs Bunny, but wanted to name the character something deeply offensive that nobody would agree to. Willie Black Eye Griffin was a silent movie actor with an odd voice, who always got a black eye at the end of each sketch, and eventually died when he got stabbed in a card game. These ancestors aren't just throwaway gags. They represent the show's willingness to trace Peter's dysfunction back through generations, suggesting that chaos and poor decision-making are encoded in the Griffin family DNA. Now, Peter's adult life has been defined by a series of dead-end jobs and career disasters. He started working at the Happy-Go-Lucky toy factory as a safety inspector, despite having no qualifications for the position and frequently ignoring basic safety protocols that led to dangerous products being sold to children. His boss, Jonathan Weed, eventually choked to death on a dinner roll while dining with Peter and Lois, which says something about the deadly effect Peter has on the people around him. After the toy factory, Peter moved to the Pawtucket Brewery, working in the shipping department, where he spends most of his time drinking the product he's supposed to be shipping. Throughout the series, Peter has held countless other positions, each one ending in spectacular failure. He's been a commercial fisherman, a tobacco company spokesman, and a Renaissance Fair knight, the founder of his own country called Pretoria, a feminist after taking a sensitivity training course, a truck driver, a TV producer, an internet celebrity, a restaurant owner, and briefly, the Pope. Every single job ends the same way, with Peter either getting fired, causing massive property damage, or simply walking away when he gets bored. His inability to maintain steady employment should have left his family destitute, but the show's floating timeline and loose relationship with economic reality means the Griffins always have enough money to keep their house and maintain their lifestyle. Peter's relationship with alcohol defines much of his character. He spends nearly every evening at the Drunken Clam with his friends Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire, and drinking Pawtucket Patriot ale until he can barely walk home. His consumption would kill a normal person, but Peter seems immune to the long-term health effects of his lifestyle. He's been shot, stabbed, blown up, crushed, poisoned, and subjected to countless other traumas that would hospitalize or kill anyone else. He regenerates, bounces back, and returns to his normal routine as if nothing happened. The show has revealed that Peter has an IQ that places him slightly below the threshold for mental retardation, but higher than a creationist, according to a test he takes in the episode Petarded. This low intelligence explains many of his actions, but doesn't excuse them. Peter knows right from wrong on some level. He just chooses to ignore those boundaries when it's convenient or when doing the wrong thing seems more fun. His childlike worldview means he lives entirely in the moment, never considering consequences until they're unavoidable. Peter's treatment of his daughter Meg has become one of the show's most controversial running gags. He constantly insults her, ignores her, and in many episodes actively works against her happiness. This cruelty seems to come from nowhere, as if Peter woke up one day and decided that psychologically tormenting his eldest child was an acceptable form of family bonding. The other family members follow his lead, turning Meg into the family scapegoat, who absorbs all their dysfunction and rage. Lois occasionally defends Meg, but more often joins in the abuse. Chris is indifferent to his sister's suffering. Stewie actively plots against her. Only Brian shows Meg any consistent kindness, and even that is unreliable. And Peter's best friend is technically his dog Brian, which raises its own questions about Peter's ability to form meaningful relationships with other humans. His friendships with Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire are superficial, based primarily on their shared love of drinking and their willingness to tolerate each other's worst qualities. When Cleveland moved away to star in his own short-lived spin-off series, The Cleveland Show, Peter barely seemed to notice beyond complaining about having one fewer person to drink with. When Cleveland eventually moved back, Peter welcomed him without any acknowledgement of how much time had passed. The evolution of Peter's character over 20-plus seasons reflects the show's gradual shift in tone. Early, Peter was obnoxious and stupid, but fundamentally well-meaning. He loved his family, even if he expressed that love through increasingly dangerous schemes and terrible decisions. Modern Peter is meaner, more selfish, and less sympathetic. He commits genuine crimes without remorse, emotionally abuses his family members, and rarely learns from his mistakes. The show's writers seem to have realized that Peter works better as an agent of chaos than as a lovable oaf, even if that makes him less likable as a protagonist. Lois Pewterschmidt Griffin, the rebel who married down. Lois Patrice Pewterschmidt grew up in a world of wealth, privilege, and expectation that she systematically dismantled through a series of rebellious choices, culminating in her marriage to Peter Griffin. Understanding Lois requires understanding the Pewterschmidt family, one of the wealthiest dynasties in Rhode Island and possibly the entire country. Or her father, Carter Pewterschmidt, is a multi-billionaire industrialist who owns shipping companies, manufacturing plants, and enough influence to manipulate politicians and world events when it suits his purposes. The Pewterschmidt fortune wasn't built on ethical business practices. Carter is ruthless, prejudiced, and openly hostile toward anyone he considers beneath him, which includes essentially everyone who isn't a wealthy white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. He despises Peter with a burning passion that transcends normal father-in-law disapproval. To Carter, Peter represents everything wrong with America. A lazy, stupid, working-class Catholic who somehow convinced his daughter to abandon her privileged life and settle for suburban mediocrity. Lois's mother, Barbara Pewterschmidt, appears to be the typical wealthy society wife, unelegant and refined. But the show later reveals that Barbara is actually a Jewish Holocaust survivor who concealed her Judaism to fit into WASP high society. This revelation adds unexpected depth to Lois's character. She was raised Protestant, taught to value the trappings of wealth and status, but her mother's hidden identity suggests that everything about the Pewterschmidt family image is a carefully constructed lie. Barbara survived genuine horror, escaped to America, and built a new identity based on hiding her true self. That kind of deep-seated deception and trauma doesn't just disappear. It gets passed down through generations in subtle ways. Lois has an older brother named Patrick Pewterschmidt, who was institutionalized before Lois was old enough to remember him. Patrick witnessed their mother having an affair with Jackie Gleason, and the trauma of seeing his mother's infidelity broke something in his mind. He was committed to a mental institution where he remained for decades, forgotten by the family. When Peter accidentally causes Patrick to snap during a brief period of freedom, Patrick becomes a serial killer known as the Fat Guy Strangler, targeting overweight men and murdering them by strangulation. The fact that Lois has a murderous brother who targets people exactly like her husband adds another layer of dysfunction to the family dynamics. Lois also has a sister, Carol, who appears occasionally throughout the series. Carol shares Lois's New England accent and privileged upbringing, but hasn't found the same stability that Lois achieved through marriage and motherhood. The Pewterschmidt children all carry deep psychological scars from growing up in a household where money meant everything and genuine human connection meant nothing. Carter valued his children only for what they could contribute to the family legacy. When Patrick's mental breakdown made him a liability, Carter erased him from family history rather than getting him the help he needed. Before meeting Peter, Lois lived a wild life that directly contradicted her wealthy upbringing. She was known as Loose Lois during her younger years, a nickname that referenced her sexual promiscuity and her willingness to experiment with drugs, alcohol, and dangerous behavior. She smoked marijuana regularly, tried methamphetamine, and engaged in activities that her father would have found horrifying if he'd known about them. This wild streak wasn't just teenage rebellion. It was Lois actively trying to destroy the person her parents wanted her to be. Lois met Peter when he was working as a towel boy for her aunt, Marguerite Pewterschmidt, who owned a mansion in Newport. Peter was young, broke, and completely unsuitable as a romantic partner for someone of Lois's social standing. That's exactly why Lois pursued him. She saw in Peter someone who represented everything her father hated. Someone who could never fit into the Pewterschmidt world, no matter how hard he tried. Marrying Peter was Lois's ultimate act of rebellion against her family and the lifestyle they represented. The marriage happened despite Carter's vocal opposition. He used every tool at his disposal to prevent the wedding, from bribes to threats to attempts at physically separating them. When all else failed, Carter simply accepted that his daughter had made a terrible decision and spent the next several decades making sure Peter knew exactly how little Carter thought of him. Every family gathering becomes an opportunity for Carter to insult Peter, remind him of his lower class status, and suggest that Lois made a mistake in marrying him. Lois's relationship with motherhood is complicated and often disturbing. The show has revealed that she never actually wanted to be a mother. Meg was conceived accidentally when Lois's birth control failed due to antibiotic interference. Chris resulted from a broken condom, with the resulting lawsuit against the condom manufacturer paying for the Griffin house. Stewie was conceived when Lois, feeling like her life lacked purpose, and deliberately got pregnant without fully discussing it with Peter. In one particularly dark episode, it's revealed that Lois raped Peter to conceive the children, believing that motherhood would justify her existence. Despite not wanting children, Lois has a complex relationship with her role as a mother. She's fiercely protective when genuine danger threatens her family, capable of violence to defend her children. She earned a black belt in taijutsu after being mugged, demonstrating impressive martial arts skills that she uses throughout the series. She became an undefeated championship boxer with an 18-0 record. When pushed, Lois is far more dangerous than Peter, capable of calculated violence rather than Peter's sloppy chaos. Lois has also had numerous careers throughout the series, and each one revealing different aspects of her personality. She worked as a piano teacher in early episodes, showing a refined artistic side that came from her privileged upbringing. She became a Fox News reporter, demonstrating her ability to navigate media and present herself professionally. She was elected mayor of Quahog, proving she could win popular support and wield political power. She worked as a flight attendant, a phone sex operator, and a postal worker. Each job shows Lois's adaptability and her constant need to be more than just Peter's wife or the kid's mother. The show has also revealed Lois's taste for sadomasochism and other unconventional sexual practices. She dresses as a dominatrix, enjoys pain mixed with pleasure, and is engaged in various acts that suggest her sexual psychology is deeply complicated. And this isn't just the show being edgy. It connects to Lois's need to maintain control in some aspect of her life. She can't control Peter's behavior, can't control how her children turn out, and can't change the fact that she married into a dysfunctional working-class family. But she can control the terms of her sexual encounters, establishing dominance in the bedroom even when she feels powerless everywhere else. Lois has struggled with addiction multiple times throughout the series. She developed a gambling problem when the family visited a casino, becoming so obsessed with betting that she lost track of everything else in her life. She went through a period of kleptomania, stealing items compulsively, until she was arrested and sent to prison. These addictive behaviors mirror her wild younger years, as suggesting that Lois never fully processed her rebellious phase. She just suppressed it beneath the facade of suburban motherhood, and it occasionally erupts in destructive ways. The relationship between Lois and Peter has deteriorated significantly over the course of the series. Early episodes showed them as genuinely in love despite their differences. Peter would do stupid things, Lois would get angry, but they'd reconcile because their affection for each other was real. Modern episodes show a relationship built more on habit and resignation than actual love. Lois frequently questions why she stays with Peter, contemplates affairs with other men, and expresses regret about her life choices. Peter treats Lois more like a nagging obstacle than a partner, often forgetting she exists when something more interesting captures his attention. The show has hinted at infidelity on both sides. Lois has gone on dates with Glenn Quagmire multiple times, including in alternate timelines and when Peter temporarily lost his memory. She married Brian when Peter was presumed dead, suggesting that she's ready to move on the moment Peter is out of the picture. Peter has had his own affairs and emotional connections with other women, though his stupidity usually prevents these relationships from developing into anything serious. What makes Lois such a fascinating character is how she embodies the tension between who she was supposed to be and who she actually became. She was raised to be a wealthy socialite, to marry someone from her own class, to maintain the Pewterschmidt legacy through wealth and influence. Instead, she married a working-class idiot, lives in a modest house in Quahog, and spends her days managing a family that barely functions. But she chose this life. She actively pursued it as a rejection of everything her father represented. Whether that choice brought her happiness or just a different kind of misery is a question the show explores, but never fully answers. Meg Griffin. The scapegoat. Nobody deserves Megan Griffin exists in a state of perpetual suffering that goes beyond normal teenage angst or family dysfunction. She's the family's designated punching bag, the person everyone targets when they need to feel better about themselves. This treatment started as an occasional joke in early episodes and gradually metastasized into Meg's defining character trait. Understanding Meg requires examining not just who she is, but what the show has made her represent. Meg was born first among the Griffin children, though you'd never know it from how the family treats her. She's 18 years old, though the show's floating timeline means she's been 18 for over 2 decades. She's constantly described as ugly, mannish, and undesirable, even though her character design isn't significantly different from other female characters in the show. The cruelty toward Meg isn't based on anything she actually is. It's based on what the family needs her to be, which is someone lower than them. The show has offered occasional explanations for why the family treats Meg so poorly. In one episode, it's revealed that Meg intentionally absorbs all the family's dysfunction and abuse because without a designated target, the family would turn on each other and destroy themselves completely. This explanation tries to frame Meg's suffering as noble self-sacrifice, but it doesn't make the abuse any less disturbing to watch. Meg isn't volunteering to be mistreated. She's been conditioned to accept it as normal, which is arguably worse. Meg's relationship with her father, Peter, is particularly cruel. He constantly forgets her name, calls her names like Meg a lame a ding-dong, and actively works to sabotage any happiness she finds. When Meg gets a boyfriend, Peter drives him away. When Meg shows talent or achieves something, Peter either ignores it or finds a way to make it about himself. The episode where Meg becomes popular at school ends with Peter deliberately destroying her social status because he can't handle not being the center of attention. Lois's treatment of Meg is more passive but equally damaging. She frequently dismisses Meg's problems as unimportant, gives her terrible advice, and joins in when Peter mocks their daughter. Lois occasionally tries to help Meg, teaching her to fight back against bullies or offering motherly support. But these moments are rare and often undercut by Lois's own issues. She seems to resent Meg for representing her own failures, the daughter she never wanted, who grew up to be everything Lois feared becoming. Chris, Meg's younger brother, treats her with complete indifference. He's not actively cruel like Peter or passive-aggressive like Lois. He simply doesn't care about Meg's existence. When Meg tries to talk to Chris, he zones out or walks away. The few times Chris does acknowledge Meg, It's usually to point out something embarrassing about her, or to use her as a comparison to make himself feel better. Stewie's relationship with Meg is openly hostile. He plots against her, insults her intelligence, and treats her with contempt despite being an infant who can barely walk. The fact that a baby shows more active malice toward Meg than love, or even basic familial concern, demonstrates just how completely the family has rejected her. Only Brian shows Meg consistent kindness, and even that relationship has problematic elements. Brian occasionally uses Meg's crush on him to manipulate her, gets her hopes up romantically, only to reject her when convenient, and sometimes joins the family in mocking her when he wants to fit in with the group. The kindest member of Meg's family is a talking dog who sees her primarily as someone who worships him. Meg's life outside the family is equally miserable. She's constantly bullied at school, and primarily by a popular girl named Connie D'Amico, who makes tormenting Meg her personal mission. The bullying is relentless and creative, from public humiliation to spreading rumors to physical intimidation. The school administration does nothing to stop it. The other students either participate in the bullying or ignore it to avoid becoming targets themselves. Meg has no real friends, no support system, and no escape from the constant abuse. The show has depicted Meg attempting to improve her situation multiple times, and these attempts always fail in humiliating ways. She tries to become popular by changing her appearance, only to be exposed as a fraud. She joins various clubs and organizations, but she's either rejected or the group dissolves. She gets jobs where her bosses exploit or mistreat her. Every door Meg tries to open slams in her face, teaching her that hoping for anything better is pointless. Meg's sexuality has been explored in ways that highlight her desperation for any kind of affection or validation. She's had crushes on inappropriate people, from her school's attractive but dim mayor, to television news anchor Tom Tucker, to her own family's neighbor Quagmire, who's decades older than her. These crushes aren't cute or endearing. They're symptoms of someone so starved for positive attention that she'll fixate on anyone who shows her even momentary kindness. The show has also hinted at Meg potentially being bisexual or lesbian, with episodes showing her attracted to women. These storylines are handled with the same lack of sensitivity as everything else about Meg, and treated more as jokes about her desperation than genuine exploration of her sexuality. Meg's romantic life, regardless of who she's attracted to, is defined by rejection and humiliation. Behind the scenes, Meg's character has its own drama. The role was originally voiced by Lacey Chabert for the first season and part of the second. Chabert left due to time constraints with her acting work on Party of Five and her schoolwork. Mila Kunis took over the role and has voiced Meg ever since. The transition happened with minimal fanfare, and most viewers didn't notice the change. Kunis has described Meg as the scapegoat, someone who exists in a perpetual state of awkward adolescence and humiliation, and she's embraced the character's suffering as comedy. Kunis's performance as Meg has evolved over the years to emphasize the character's misery. Early Meg had more personality, more fight, more hope that things could get better. Modern Meg is resigned to her fate, barely bothering to defend herself when attacked, going through life with the defeated posture of someone who knows the universe hates her and has stopped trying to understand why. The most disturbing aspect of Meg's character isn't the abuse itself, it's how the show normalizes it. The audience is supposed to laugh at Meg's suffering, to find humor in her constant rejection and humiliation. The show treats Meg's pain as deserved, as if being awkward and unpopular justifies any amount of cruelty. This message is deeply problematic, especially for viewers who identify with Meg, who see their own teenage struggles reflected in her experiences. Meg represents something dark about family dynamics and social hierarchies, as she shows how groups need someone to look down on, someone to blame when things go wrong, someone whose suffering makes everyone else feel better about their own lives. The Griffin family would fall apart without Meg to absorb their dysfunction, and society would have to confront its own cruelty if it couldn't find people like Meg to torment. The fact that Family Guy makes this dynamic into comedy doesn't make it less true or less disturbing. Chris Griffin, the Gentle Giant. Christopher Cross. Griffin exists somewhere between his father's stupidity and his sister's suffering, occupying a unique position in the Griffin family hierarchy, where he's largely protected from the worst abuse, but also incapable of achieving anything meaningful. Chris is the middle child, 14 years old, in a perpetual state of awkward adolescence, struggling with his weight, his intelligence, and his place in a family that doesn't seem to know what to do with him. Chris physically resembles a younger, slightly slimmer version of Peter. He has the same round face, the same glasses, the same basic body type that suggests he's following the exact same path toward obesity and poor health that his father has taken. The show makes it clear that Chris is essentially Peter 2.0, doomed to repeat all his father's mistakes because he lacks the intelligence to learn from them and the willpower to choose a different path. The relationship between Chris and Peter is oddly warm despite Peter's general dysfunction as a parent. Peter shows Chris more affection than he shows Meg, teaching him terrible lessons about masculinity, relationships, and how to navigate the world. And Peter encourages Chris's worst impulses, celebrates his stupidity rather than trying to improve it, and treats his son more like a drinking buddy than a child who needs guidance. When Chris does something particularly dumb, Peter beams with pride, seeing his own adolescence reflected in his son's failures. Chris's intelligence, or lack thereof, defines much of his character. He struggles in school despite the classes being designed for average students. He can't grasp basic concepts, frequently misunderstands instructions, and makes decisions based on whatever impulse strikes him in the moment. His stupidity isn't cute or endearing. It's concerning, suggesting genuine cognitive impairment that should probably be addressed by medical professionals rather than laughed off as a family trait. Despite his intellectual limitations, young Chris has shown surprising artistic talent throughout the series. He's an accomplished sketch artist, capable of creating detailed, realistic portraits that demonstrate genuine skill. This ability seems completely disconnected from his general stupidity, existing as a singular island of competence in an ocean of incompetence. The show occasionally explores Chris's artistic side, showing him drawing during class or using his talent to impress girls, but it never develops this aspect of his character into anything meaningful. Chris's relationship with his weight follows a depressing pattern. He's constantly eating, consuming vast quantities of food, without any apparent self-control. The show depicts his eating as compulsive, a coping mechanism for dealing with life in a dysfunctional family. He's been on diets that fail almost immediately, and he's tried exercise routines that he abandons after a single session. The message is clear. Chris is fat and will remain fat because he lacks the willpower to change, just like his father. The evil monkey that lives in Chris's closet represents one of the show's strangest long-running gags. For years, Chris insisted that an evil monkey lived in his closet and would point at him menacingly. His family dismissed this as childish imagination or attention-seeking behavior. Eventually, the show revealed that the monkey was real, not evil, and simply traumatized from witnessing his wife's infidelity. The monkey moved out, then moved back in, and the whole situation became normalized despite being completely insane. Chris's romantic life has been surprisingly active compared to Meg's complete failure in that area. He's had multiple girlfriends, though these relationships tend to end badly. He dated a girl who was using him to make her ex-boyfriend jealous. He fell for a girl who turned out to be racist. He started a relationship with a girl only to have Peter interfere and ruin everything with terrible advice. Chris's problem isn't finding girls who are interested in him. It's maintaining relationships once his stupidity and family dysfunction become apparent. The show has explored Chris's sexuality in ways that raise questions about his maturity and understanding of appropriate behavior. He discovered masturbation and became so obsessed with it that his academic performance, already terrible, got even worse. He's had inappropriate crushes on adult women, including teachers and television personalities. His sexual awakening has been handled with the show's typical lack of sensitivity, treating adolescent sexuality as comedy material rather than something that requires nuance. Chris's relationship with Meg is characterized by complete indifference. He's not actively cruel to her like Peter, and he doesn't participate in the family's systematic abuse of their daughter. He simply doesn't care. Meg could disappear tomorrow, and Chris probably wouldn't notice for several days. This indifference is its own form of cruelty, showing Meg that she matters so little that even her own brother can't be bothered to acknowledge her existence. Stewie treats Chris with a mixture of contempt and occasional fondness. The baby clearly considers Chris intellectually inferior, which is saying something given that Stewie is literally 1 year old. But Stewie also sees Chris as potentially useful, someone he can manipulate or use for his schemes. Their relationship lacks the depth of Stewie and Brian's friendship, existing more as occasional partnerships when their interests align. Brian, the family dog, treats Chris much like he treats the rest of the family, with a mixture of affection and barely concealed contempt. Brian occasionally tries to educate Chris, teaching him about literature or culture, but these efforts fail because Chris lacks the attention span and interest to learn. Brian has given up on improving Chris, accepting that the boy will grow up to be exactly like his father. Chris's future has been glimpsed in various episodes, featuring flash-forwards or alternate timelines. In almost every version of his adult life, Chris has become even more like Peter, overweight and unemployed or working dead-end jobs, married to someone as dysfunctional as his mother, trapped in a cycle of mediocrity that seems inescapable. The only versions of adult Chris who achieve anything do so by accident or in universes where the entire family is radically different. The most depressing aspect of Chris's character is his contentment with his situation. Unlike Meg, who suffers from awareness of how terrible her life is, Chris seems genuinely happy in his stupidity. He doesn't know what he's missing. He doesn't aspire to anything better because he can't imagine anything better. His limited intelligence protects him from the existential despair that plagues more self-aware characters. In that sense, Chris might be the happiest member of the Griffin family, and blessed with ignorance that shields him from recognizing how completely doomed his life trajectory appears. Stewie Griffin, the baby genius. Stuart Gilligan. Griffin is perhaps the most complex and certainly the most enigmatic character in Family Guy's sprawling cast. He began the series as a straightforward villain, a 1-year-old baby with an inexplicable British accent, advanced intelligence, and an obsession with matricide and world domination. Over 2 decades of episodes, Stewie evolved into something far more nuanced. A character who subverts expectations while raising questions about identity, sexuality, and the nature of consciousness itself. Stewie's voice, performed by Seth MacFarlane, is based on the speaking style of English actor Rex Harrison, particularly his performance as Henry Higgins in the 1964 musical My Fair Lady, and the accent is sophisticated, cultured, and completely at odds with Stewie being a baby in a working-class Rhode Island family. In the episode Send in Stewie, Please, it's revealed that Stewie's British accent is completely fake and that he actually has an American Boston accent. This revelation is immediately undercut by Stewie, demonstrating he can speak in numerous different voices, suggesting the whole thing was a joke, or that Stewie's true voice is whatever serves his purposes in any given moment. Early Stewie was obsessed with killing Lois, his mother, who he viewed as the primary obstacle to his plans for world domination. He built elaborate weapons designed specifically to murder her. From laser guns to robots to complex death traps, Lois remained oblivious to these attempts, treating Stewie's murderous devices as cute baby toys. And the contrast between Stewie's genuine homicidal intent and Lois's complete misunderstanding created dark comedy that defined the show's early seasons. Stewie's intelligence is literally impossible. At 1 year old, he speaks fluent English, understands advanced physics and engineering, builds functional time machines and teleportation devices, and manipulates events with the skill of an adult supervillain. The show has never explained how Stewie acquired this intelligence. He wasn't born with it in the traditional sense. He achieved full consciousness and began speaking immediately after birth, emerging from the womb already plotting against his mother. This suggests Stewie might not be entirely human, or that something in the Griffin genetic line occasionally produces savant-level intelligence that manifests at birth. The centerpiece of Stewie's inventions is his time machine, which has enabled numerous adventures throughout the series and created persistent timeline issues that the show occasionally acknowledges but never resolves. Stewie's time travel has allowed him to meet Leonardo da Vinci, witness the crucifixion of Jesus, visit various periods of human history, and most importantly, explore alternate versions of his own life. These time travel episodes reveal that every choice Stewie makes creates branching timelines, suggesting that infinite versions of him exist across the multiverse, each one slightly different based on minor changes in their decisions. Stewie's relationship with Brian Griffin evolved from antagonistic to genuinely affectionate, becoming the emotional core of many episodes. Early episodes showed them as rivals, and with Stewie mocking Brian's pretensions and Brian dismissing Stewie as an irritating child. Over time, they became best friends, partners in adventures that take them across time and space. The Road to episodes featuring Stewie and Brian traveling to different dimensions and locations became fan favorites, showcasing their dynamic as a sophisticated baby and a talking dog facing absurd situations with wit and occasional genuine emotion. The question of Stewie's sexuality has become one of the show's most discussed aspects. Early hints suggested Stewie might be gay, with jokes about his appreciation of muscular men, his collection of Broadway musical recordings, and his generally flamboyant personality. As the series progressed, these hints became more explicit, with Stewie developing crushes on adult men, he expressing attraction to Brian's son Dylan, and generally displaying behavior that suggested a gay identity he hasn't fully acknowledged or accepted. However, the show has also depicted Stewie attracted to women, most notably in the episode Damn It, Janet, where he falls in love with a baby girl named Janet. Seth MacFarlane has described Stewie as a very unhappy, repressed heterosexual in this context, suggesting that Stewie's sexuality is deliberately ambiguous and possibly in flux. The show seems to be exploring the idea that sexuality isn't fixed, especially for someone as complex as Stewie, or that Stewie exists in a state of sexual confusion that mirrors his general state of being caught between infancy and adulthood. One of the most fascinating aspects of Stewie's character is the question of who can understand him. Brian can always hear and understand Stewie, treating him as an equal rather than a baby. Chris has recently started understanding Stewie more clearly, suggesting that the ability to comprehend him might develop over time or be based on mental compatibility. Peter, Lois, and Meg generally seem unable to understand Stewie's words, hearing only baby babble or interpreting his complex sentences as cute infant sounds. Seth MacFarlane has addressed this question at various Comic-Con panels, explaining that everyone can basically understand Stewie, but they choose to ignore him or interpret his words as baby talk, because taking a 1-year-old seriously would be absurd. He's compared it to Wile E. Coyote physics, where the rules bend based on what's funny in any given moment. And this means Stewie's ability to communicate with other characters is determined by narrative convenience rather than consistent in-universe logic. Stewie's evolution from villain to complex character mirrors the show's overall development. Early Family Guy needed a shock character, someone who violated all expectations of how babies should behave. Making that baby an evil genius who wanted to kill his mother and conquer the world provided the necessary shock value. But as the show matured, pure shock became less interesting than character development. Stewie's plans for world domination quietly disappeared, replaced by adventures with Brian, experiments with his sexuality, and surprisingly emotional moments that revealed genuine vulnerability beneath his arrogant exterior. And the episode Brian and Stewie represents the peak of this character development. It features only Brian and Stewie, trapped in a bank vault for an entire episode with no cutaway gags, no other characters, just two friends having an honest conversation about life, death, and what they mean to each other. Stewie reveals his fear that Brian will die long before he does, leaving him alone with a family that doesn't understand him. Brian confesses his own fears and insecurities. They tell each other they love one another, a genuine emotional moment that feels earned despite the absurdity of a baby and a talking dog having this conversation. Stewie's inventions extend far beyond the time machine. He's built weather-controlling devices, shrink rays, teleportation pads, cloning machines, mind control helmets, and countless weapons ranging from laser guns to nuclear bombs. The fact that a 1-year-old has access to technology that could reshape reality or destroy civilization raises questions that the show never seriously addresses. Where does Stewie get the materials for these devices? How does he understand physics and engineering at a level that surpasses the world's greatest scientists? Why doesn't he use his inventions to actually take over the world instead of just going on adventures with Brian? The show has hinted that Stewie's intelligence might diminish as he ages. In the direct-to-DVD movie, Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, older versions of Stewie appear with progressively lower intelligence, suggesting that his genius is tied to his infant state and will fade as he grows. This creates a tragic subtext to Stewie's character, and he's brilliant now, capable of achievements that should be impossible, but that brilliance has an expiration date. Eventually, he'll become just another stupid member of the Griffin family, his memories of being a genius fading into childhood dreams he can barely remember. Stewie's relationship with his twin brother Dave, whom Stewie murdered in the womb, adds another dark layer to his character. The show has revealed that Stewie isn't even the only baby Lois gave birth to. There was Peter Griffin Jr., who died when Peter shook him too much. There's Bertram, Stewie's half-brother born from Peter's sperm donation, who became Stewie's archenemy and was eventually killed. The Griffin family has lost multiple children to violence and stupidity, and somehow this is treated as comedy rather than tragedy, as Stewie's relationship with Lois evolved significantly after the two-part episode Stewie kills Lois and Lois kills Stewie, where Stewie finally murders his mother and takes over the world, only for it to be revealed as a computer simulation. After this episode, Stewie's matricidal tendencies largely disappeared, replaced by a more typical mother-son relationship. He still finds Lois annoying and occasionally plots against her in minor ways, but the genuine, murderous intent is gone. Some part of Stewie needed to live out his fantasy of killing Lois, even in simulation form, to move past that obsession. The most recent seasons have shown Stewie becoming more self-aware and emotionally vulnerable. He's acknowledged his need for Brian's friendship, his confusion about his sexuality, and his fear of growing up and losing his intelligence. This version of Stewie is less of a villain and more of a complicated person trapped in a baby's body, trying to understand himself while navigating a family that will never fully appreciate his brilliance. Brian Griffin, the intellectual fraud. Brian H. Griffin presents himself as the most cultured, educated, and refined member of the Griffin household. He attended Brown University, writes novels and screenplays, appreciates fine wine and classical music, and speaks with Seth MacFarlane's normal voice rather than an exaggerated accent. Brian positions himself as the family's voice of reason, the intellectual who suffers through the chaos surrounding him with wit and sophistication. The reality is far more complicated and considerably less flattering. Brian was born on a puppy mill in Austin, Texas, in a litter of 5 puppies. His father was a guard dog named Coco. His mother was named Biscuit, and unlike their genius son, neither could speak or displayed any unusual intelligence. Brian's ability to talk, walk on 2 legs, and function as essentially human has never been explained. The show simply accepts that Brian is an anthropomorphic dog, and most characters treat him as they would any other person, despite him clearly being a white Labrador retriever. When Brian was 3 weeks old, he was taken from his mother and believed she had abandoned him. This early separation trauma has shaped Brian's entire psychological profile. He struggles with abandonment issues, seeks validation through romantic relationships and writing success, and battles depression that occasionally threatens to overwhelm him completely. His adoption by the Henderson family ended when Brian went missing, and they eventually stopped looking for him, deciding to leave it to God's will rather than continue searching. Brian became a stray, wandering the streets of Quahog, until Peter found him and offered him a home. The exact timeline of Brian joining the Griffin family has been inconsistently portrayed. In the episode Brian, Portrait of a Dog, Brian became a Griffin during his adulthood, when Peter found him. But in The Man with Two Brians, Brian shows the family videos of himself as a puppy, already living in the Griffin house. This contradiction is typical of Family Guy's loose continuity, where backstory changes based on what's convenient for individual episodes. Brian's education at Brown University is one of his defining achievements, something he mentions frequently to establish his intellectual credentials. However, the show has revealed that Brian didn't actually graduate. He dropped out one course away from completing his degree, undermining his claims of being well educated. This pattern of near success defines Brian's entire life. He almost graduated from an Ivy League school. He almost published a successful novel. He almost had meaningful romantic relationships. Almost becomes Brian's tragedy, the gap between who he pretends to be and who he actually is. Brian's writing career has been a source of constant frustration and occasional success. He wrote a novel called Faster Than the Speed of Love that was initially rejected by every publisher. When it finally got published, it received scathing reviews and sold poorly. Critics described it as pretentious, poorly written, and derivative. Brian's response to this failure was to write another novel called Wish It, Want It, Do It, a self-help book that became a bestseller despite being terrible. This success validated Brian's worst instincts, teaching him that pandering to the lowest common denominator brings rewards while genuine artistic effort leads to rejection. The episode Brian Writes a Bestseller showcases Brian at his absolute worst. As his self-help book gains popularity, Brian becomes increasingly arrogant and insufferable, treating his friends and family with contempt while embracing the shallow celebrity culture he previously claimed to despise. He yells at Stewie for minor annoyances, throws tantrums when things don't go his way, and generally reveals that his liberalism and intellectual pretensions are superficial, are masks covering an ego that needs constant validation. Brian's political beliefs have been a recurring source of comedy and controversy. He presents himself as a liberal atheist, advocating for progressive causes and looking down on conservatives and religious people. However, his liberalism is performative rather than principled. He supports liberal causes when it makes him look good, but doesn't actually sacrifice anything for his beliefs. He lectures others about tolerance while being intolerant of anyone who disagrees with him. His atheism manifests as smug superiority rather than thoughtful philosophy. Brian's romantic relationships have been consistently disastrous. He dated Gillian, a beautiful but intellectually challenged woman, voiced by Drew Barrymore. Their relationship failed because Brian couldn't respect Gillian's intelligence, while Gillian couldn't understand Brian's pretentious references. He's been with numerous other women, often pursuing relationships with people who are clearly wrong for him, or who don't actually respect him. His neediness and insecurity sabotage relationships before they can develop into anything meaningful. The most problematic aspect of Brian's romantic life is his relationship with human women, despite being a dog. The show treats this as comedy, but the implications are deeply disturbing. Brian has had sex with multiple human women, dated them, pursued relationships with them, and even fathered children with them. This crosses obvious boundaries of species and consent in ways the show largely ignores. The few times characters comment on the weirdness of a dog dating humans, it's played for laughs rather than treated as the serious issue it would be in any reality. Brian's death in the episode Life of Brian shocked fans and created massive backlash. Stewie's time machine was destroyed in an accident, eliminating the possibility of going back to save Brian when he was hit by a car. The family replaced him with another dog named Vinny, and for 2 episodes, it seemed like Brian was permanently gone. The fan response was unprecedented, with petitions demanding Brian's return, death threats sent to the show's creators, and widespread anger across social media. 2 episodes later, in Christmas Guy, Stewie found a way to rebuild the time machine and saved Brian from being hit. The death and resurrection of Brian revealed how much fans cared about the character despite his flaws. But it also highlighted the show's unwillingness to commit to real consequences. Brian's death could have been a powerful statement about mortality and change, but bringing him back 2 episodes later turned it into a cheap stunt designed to manipulate audience emotions. The show wanted the impact of killing a main character without actually losing that character. Brian's relationship with the Griffin family has evolved over the years, generally not in ways that make him more likable. He's become more critical of Peter's stupidity, more judgmental of Lois's decisions, more dismissive of Chris's interests, and more willing to participate in Meg's abuse. Only his friendship with Stewie remains genuine, and even that relationship has had moments where Brian's selfishness damaged the trust between them. The show has also explored Brian's struggles with addiction. He's an alcoholic, though his drinking is portrayed as sophisticated because he prefers martinis to beer. He smoked marijuana regularly throughout the series. He briefly became addicted to cocaine after working as a drug-sniffing dog. His addictions are treated as character quirks rather than serious problems requiring intervention. Another example of the show's refusal to engage seriously with the darker implications of its characters' behavior. Brian's pretensions about his own intelligence and culture have been repeatedly exposed as shallow. He claims to appreciate literature, but hasn't actually read the books that he references. He acts like a film buff, but prefers mainstream blockbusters to the art films he pretends to enjoy. He positions himself as morally superior, but makes selfish decisions that hurt people around him. The character, who started as the family's voice of reason, has become a hypocritical, self-absorbed pseudo-intellectual, whose primary function is to demonstrate that education and liberal politics don't automatically make someone a good person. Quahog, Rhode Island, a city built on chaos. The fictional city of Quahog, Rhode Island serves as more than just a backdrop for Family Guy's chaos. It's a character in its own right, with a rich history, bizarre geography, and a population that seems specifically designed to enable the worst behavior imaginable. Understanding Quahog requires examining its founding myths, its modern reality, and the question of where exactly this insane town actually exists. According to official Family Guy lore, Quahog was founded in the 17th century by Griffin Peterson, one of Peter Griffin's ancestors. Peterson was a gentleman in England engaged to marry Lady Redbush when the tyrannical King Stuart III desired her for himself. The king falsely informed Lady Redbush that Peterson had died, married her, and exiled Peterson to the New World. Peterson arrived on the shores of what would become Rhode Island, along with a group of fellow exiles punished for various offences like public indecency and minor crimes. He proclaimed the land Quahog and established a colony there. The name Quahog comes from the Quahog clam, an edible hard-shell bivalve abundant in New England coastal waters. It's pronounced Quahog in the show, reflecting southern New England dialect. The name choice allows the show to evoke Rhode Island culture without referencing an actual municipality, giving the writers freedom to depict the town however they want, without offending real Rhode Island residents. This decision came from writer Danny Smith's previous experience writing a joke about Pawtucket for the show Nurses that angered the actual mayor of Pawtucket and made him fear retaliation from angry Rhode Islanders with pitchforks and torches. However, there's an alternative founding myth presented in other episodes. The legend of Miles Chatterbox Musket claims he was a sailor thrown overboard from a New York colony boat for speaking his mind too much, which really meant he wouldn't shut up. According to this tale, A magical clam rescued Musket and brought him ashore, sharing his vision of founding a new town named Quahog. The clam later left Musket because he contemplated harming it. Musket never spoke again and eventually died from a combination of tuberculosis and a tomahawk to the head. The clam returned to find Musket stuffed in a pickle barrel. These events are celebrated annually at the Quahog Clam Festival, suggesting that at least some residents believe this version of history. The show has presented conflicting information about Quahog's precise location within Rhode Island. It's stated to be in Newport County, where Peter's birth certificate lists his birthplace. The town is modeled after Cranston, Rhode Island, part of the Providence metropolitan area, according to Seth MacFarlane himself. Various episodes show Quahog with a coastline, which would place it near Cranston or Providence, and both of which have access to water. The zip code is given as 00093 in most episodes, though at least one episode listed as 02949. Maps shown in different episodes place Quahog in completely different locations. One map shows it near Tiverton. Another places it between Cranston and Warwick, almost directly north of Theodore Francis Green Airport. The show seems deliberately inconsistent about Quahog's location, treating Rhode Island geography as flexible rather than fixed. This allows the writers to give Quahog whatever characteristics serve individual episode plots, without worrying about maintaining geographical accuracy. The Griffin family lives at 31 Spooner Street, a two-story house with a distinctive layout that's been shown extensively throughout the series. Interestingly, there is a real 31 Spooner Street in Providence and Rhode Island, located immediately west of Roger Williams Park. Whether this is intentional reference or coincidence isn't clear, but it gives fans a real-world location to associate with the Griffin home. Quahog's skyline features buildings clearly inspired by Providence's downtown, including One Financial Plaza, 50 Kennedy Plaza, and the Industrial National Bank building. The ordering of these buildings and the angle they're viewed from suggests Quahog is primarily west of downtown Providence. This placement makes sense given that Cranston, the town Quahog is modeled after, sits to the west of Providence. The Drunken Clam serves as Quahog's primary gathering place for the show's male characters. It's a dive bar where Peter, Quagmire, Joe, and formerly Cleveland spend their evenings drinking Pawtucket Patriot Ale and discussing their lives. The bar's name is a reference to the Quahog clam, continuing the New England seafood theme. Behind a painting of legendary founder Miles Chatterbox Musket, there's allegedly a treasure chest containing an expired restaurant coupon, a gag that undercuts the town's founding mythology by suggesting its treasures are worthless. The Pawtucket Brewery employs Peter and represents Quahog's major industry. The brewery produces Pawtucket Patriot Ale, named after the real Rhode Island city of Pawtucket. The beer flows freely through the town, fueling much of the chaos that defines Quahog life. The brewery itself has been the setting for numerous episodes involving workplace accidents, Peter's schemes, and the revelation that Pawtucket Patriot Ale is identical to a rival beer, leading to legal disputes. James Woods Regional High School serves Quahog's teenagers and is named after the actor James Woods, who has appeared as himself in multiple episodes. The school represents typical American high school dysfunction, magnified to absurd levels. Bullying is rampant and rarely punished. Teachers are incompetent or inappropriate. The administration seems more concerned with avoiding lawsuits than actually educating students. The school's naming after a living actor who's appeared on the show creates a metatextual joke about celebrity and education. The Quahog City Hall serves as the center of local government, such as it is. Various episodes have shown the corruption and incompetence that define Quahog politics. Adam West, the actor who played Batman in the 1960s television series, served as Quahog's mayor for many seasons until the character was retired following Adam West's death in real life. Mayor West was portrayed as completely insane, making decisions based on delusions and nonsensical logic, yet somehow remaining in office election after election. This suggests that Quahog voters are either too apathetic to elect competent leadership or prefer the chaos that West's administration provided. Quahog's police department is led by Joe Swanson, a paraplegic officer who somehow remains on active duty despite his disability. The department is shown as largely ineffective, failing to solve crimes, arriving too late to prevent disasters, and sometimes actively making situations worse. Police corruption and incompetence are running jokes, with officers more interested in donuts and avoiding work than actually protecting citizens. The town's medical care is provided primarily by Dr. Elmer Hartman, who shares a voice with Carter Pewterschmidt, because Seth MacFarlane voices both characters. Dr. Hartman is portrayed as dangerously incompetent, misdiagnosing conditions, performing unnecessary procedures, and generally endangering his patients through ignorance and carelessness. The fact that he remains Quahog's primary physician suggests that medical malpractice is either legal or simply not prosecuted in this town. Quahog Memorial Hospital appears frequently as the site of medical emergencies resulting from the family's various disasters. Characters are regularly hospitalized for injuries that should be fatal, only to recover completely by the next episode. And the hospital staff shows remarkable patience with the Griffin family despite their frequent visits and inability to pay bills. The Goldman Pharmacy is run by Mort Goldman and his family, providing medication and other pharmaceutical needs to Quahog residents. Mort is portrayed as neurotic and Jewish, often the target of jokes about his faith and personality. The pharmacy serves as a recurring location where characters interact with the Goldmans and obtain whatever medical supplies episodes require. Various retail establishments populate Quahog, from the mall where teenagers congregate to specific stores that characters visit for plot purposes. The consistency of these locations varies wildly. Some appear regularly throughout the series. Others show up for single episodes and are never mentioned again. Quahog's commercial infrastructure seems to materialize based on narrative needs rather than following any logical pattern of business development. Quahog's demographics are never clearly established, but the population appears to be predominantly white, middle class, and Catholic or Protestant. The town has small Jewish, Asian, and Black populations, though these communities are often portrayed through stereotypes rather than realistic representation. The show's humor frequently targets racial and ethnic minorities, using Quahog's relative homogeneity as a baseline for jokes about outsiders. The town's relationship with neighboring communities is rarely explored in depth. Newport is mentioned as the location of the Pewterschmidt estate, suggesting it's relatively close to Quahog. Providence appears in some episodes as a larger city where characters go for specific purposes. The town exists in a vague regional context where distances and relationships between locations change based on convenience. Quahog has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times throughout the series. It's been flooded, bombed, invaded by foreign armies, taken over by criminals, and subjected to various other catastrophes. Each time, it returns to normal by the next episode with no explanation for how the damage was repaired or who paid for reconstruction. This resilience suggests that Quahog exists in a state of perpetual reset, where consequences disappear between episodes to maintain the status quo. The supporting cast, Quahog's finest and worst Glenn Quagmire, lives next door to the Griffins and represents sexual deviancy taken to cartoon extremes. He's a commercial airline pilot who spends his free time pursuing sexual encounters with as many women as possible, regardless of whether they're interested or appropriate partners. Quagmire's catchphrase, "giggity," has become iconic, a verbal expression of his constant sexual arousal and his reduction of human interaction to opportunities for intercourse. Quagmire's character reveals disturbing depths beneath the surface comedy. He's attempted to sleep with Meg despite her being far too young. He's engaged in behavior that borders on or crosses into sexual assault. He keeps a collection of hidden cameras throughout his house. He's implied to have committed genuinely horrific acts that the show treats as jokes rather than serious crimes. The fact that Quagmire remains friends with the other characters despite these behaviors suggests a moral flexibility in Quahog that would be unacceptable in reality. Quagmire's hatred of Brian Griffin stems from Brian's hypocrisy and pretension. In the episode Jerome is the New Black, Quagmire delivers a lengthy speech explaining exactly why he despises Brian, listing Brian's self-absorption, his treatment of women, his pseudo-intellectual posturing, and his general phoniness. This moment is interesting because Quagmire, who is objectively a worse person than Brian in terms of actual behavior, can still accurately identify Brian's character flaws. It suggests that Quagmire has at least some self-awareness about his own terribleness, while Brian remains deluded about his superiority. Joe Swanson lives across the street from the Griffins with his wife Bonnie and their children Kevin and Susie. Joe is a paraplegic police officer who lost the use of his legs when a criminal named Bobby Briggs pushed him off a roof during a confrontation. Despite his disability, Joe remains on active police duty, somehow performing tasks that should require full mobility. His upper body strength is superhuman, allowing him to compete physically with able-bodied individuals and occasionally exceed their capabilities. Joe's marriage to Bonnie is dysfunctional in ways that mirror other relationships in the show, and Bonnie was pregnant for several seasons of real-world time before finally giving birth to Susie, a running joke about the show's floating timeline. Their relationship shows signs of serious strain, with Bonnie expressing frustration about being married to a disabled man and Joe struggling with feelings of inadequacy about his inability to provide certain aspects of married life. The character of Joe raises questions about representation and disability in comedy. On one hand, the show depicts a disabled person as capable, strong, and continuing to lead an active life despite physical limitations. On the other hand, Joe's superhuman abilities and his ability to perform police work that should be impossible for someone in a wheelchair undercuts realistic representation. The show wants the diversity credit for including a disabled character, while avoiding the actual limitations and challenges that come with disability. Cleveland Brown was Peter's friend and neighbor before leaving to star in The Cleveland Show, a short-lived spin-off that ran from 2009 to 2013. Cleveland is portrayed as mild-mannered and even-tempered, often serving as the voice of reason among Peter's friend group. His first marriage to Loretta ended when she had an affair with Quagmire, leading to their divorce. Cleveland moved back to his hometown of Stool Bend, Virginia, where he reunited with his high school sweetheart Donna and started a new life. When The Cleveland Show was cancelled, Cleveland returned to Quahog and rejoined the cast of Family Guy as if he'd never left. His house, which had been destroyed in an accident caused by Peter, was rebuilt, and Cleveland settled back into his old life. The show made occasional references to his time away, but generally treated his absence as a minor interruption rather than a significant life change. Cleveland represents the show's complicated relationship with race and racial humor. He's voiced by a white actor, Mike Henry, using an affected voice that draws from racial stereotypes about how black men speak. The character has been the target of numerous racial jokes throughout the series, some commenting on racism and others simply being racist for comedic effect. After George Floyd's murder in 2020, Mike Henry announced he would no longer voice Cleveland, acknowledging that a black character should be voiced by a black actor. Arif Zahir took over the role, marking a significant change in the show's approach to racial representation. Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's father, represents old money, entitlement, and the casual cruelty of the ultra-wealthy. He's a multi-billionaire industrialist who owns shipping companies, manufacturing plants, and enough politicians to influence policy at the highest levels. Carter's wealth isn't just extensive, it's nearly infinite, allowing him to buy countries, control elections, and shape world events when it amuses him to do so. Carter's relationship with Peter is defined by contempt, barely concealed beneath a veneer of civility. He makes it clear at every opportunity that he considers Peter beneath his daughter, a working-class Catholic idiot who somehow convinced Lois to abandon her privileged life. Carter has tried multiple times to break up their marriage, offering Peter money to leave, creating situations designed to drive them apart, and generally undermining their relationship whenever possible. Barbara Pewterschmidt, Lois's mother, appears to be the quintessential wealthy society wife, until the show reveals she's actually a Jewish Holocaust survivor who concealed her identity to marry into WASP high society. This revelation adds unexpected depth to the Pewterschmidt family, suggesting that even their foundation of wealth and status is built on deception and hidden trauma. Barbara's survival of genuine historical horror contrasts sharply with the petty problems that consume most characters' attention. The Pewterschmidt family's wealth enables many of the show's plots, providing convenient solutions when the Griffins need money or access to resources beyond their means. And Carter can buy Peter out of legal trouble, fund elaborate schemes, or provide financial support when the plot requires it. This wealth also creates contrast between Lois's upbringing and her current life, highlighting the choice she made to reject privilege in favor of something she believed was more authentic. Tom Tucker and Diane Simmons serve as Quahog's primary news anchors for Channel 5 News. Tom is portrayed as vain, stupid, and completely detached from the stories he reports. His son, Jake Tucker, has a bizarre condition where his face is upside down, which the show treats as normal within the universe. Diane Simmons appeared as co-anchor, until it was revealed she was a murderer who killed James Woods and framed others for the crime. Stewie killed Diane to save Lois, eliminating one of the show's long-running supporting characters. Tricia Takanawa serves as the Asian correspondent for Channel 5 News, appearing at various locations to provide field reporting. Her character is based on Asian reporter stereotypes, with Tricia speaking in the stereotypical accent and being portrayed as exotic. The character represents the show's willingness to use racial and ethnic stereotypes for comedy, something that has drawn criticism over the years. Herbert is the Griffin's elderly neighbor who exhibits disturbing sexual interest in young boys, particularly Chris. His character is based on child predator stereotypes. Played for dark comedy, that makes many viewers uncomfortable. Herbert speaks in an exaggerated elderly voice and uses his frail appearance to seem harmless while engaging in behavior that should result in police intervention. The fact that Herbert remains a recurring character despite being an obvious threat to children demonstrates the show's commitment to pushing boundaries regardless of good taste. The recurring characters of Quahog create an environment where dysfunction is normalized and genuine pathology is treated as quirky rather than criminal. These aren't just background characters filling out the world. They're active participants in creating the moral void that allows the show's darkest humor to function. Quahog couldn't exist without its population of perverts, criminals, and incompetents enabling each other's worst behavior. Alternate Universes and the Multiverse Family Guy has explored alternate timelines, parallel universes, and time travel with surprising frequency, creating a complex multiverse where infinite variations of Quahog exist. And these explorations began as one-off jokes but evolved into a significant aspect of the show's mythology, particularly through the Road 2 episodes featuring Stewie and Brian. The Road 2 episodes pay homage to the classic Road to Film starring Bing Crosby and Bob Hope. Each episode sends Stewie and Brian to a different location or reality, far removed from Quahog. The episodes feature elaborate musical numbers, adventure parodies, and genuine emotional moments between the two characters. They're considered some of the show's best work, demonstrating that Family Guy can sustain storytelling that goes beyond random cutaway gags. Road to Rhode Island, the first of these episodes, features Stewie traveling to pick up a teddy bear he left at Palm Springs and accidentally getting lost. Brian tracks him down, and they journey back to Rhode Island together. The episode includes a musical number where Brian reveals his tragic past and how he became a stray. This moment of genuine vulnerability contrasts with Brian's usual pretentious posturing, showing that underneath his intellectual facade is a damaged dog with abandonment issues. Road to Europe sends Stewie and Brian across the Atlantic after Stewie boards a wrong flight, thinking it's going to visit his favorite children's television host. They travel through various European locations, encountering different cultures and dangers while trying to find their way home. The episode showcases their ability to work together despite their differences, with Stewie's intelligence and Brian's experience complementing each other. A Road to Rupert involves Stewie searching for his beloved teddy bear Rupert across the multiverse. He and Brian jump between different realities, each one showing variations of Quahog, with different rules and different versions of familiar characters. This episode establishes that Stewie's time travel and interdimensional technology has created countless branching timelines, each one slightly different based on choices made by various versions of the characters. Road to the Multiverse might be the most ambitious of these episodes, featuring Stewie showing Brian a remote control that allows them to jump between parallel universes at will. They visit universes where everyone is drawn in different animation styles, including a Disney universe, a universe drawn in the style of Robot Chicken, and a live-action universe. They visit a universe where Christianity never existed, a universe where dogs rule and humans are pets, and most controversially, a universe where the United States never dropped atomic bombs on Japan, resulting in Japanese control of America. This multiverse episode raises fascinating questions about identity and reality. If infinite versions of every character exist, each one making slightly different choices, what makes any individual version special? Are they all equally real? Can actions in one universe affect others? The show doesn't attempt to answer these philosophical questions, treating the multiverse more as a playground for visual gags and cultural satire than serious science fiction. The episode where Stewie kills Lois and takes over the world revealed that Stewie has been using a simulation to test different scenarios and their outcomes. This suggests that many episodes might be simulations Stewie runs to see what would happen if circumstances changed. It creates an unsettling subtext where nothing can be trusted as real versus simulation, where the family's experiences might be nothing more than Stewie's experiments in alternate realities. Stewie's time travel has created persistent timeline issues that occasionally surface in episodes. He's changed the past multiple times, creating ripple effects that alter the present. He accidentally prevented 9/11 from happening, which seemed positive until the changes to history created worse outcomes. He's met his future self, I'm who warned him about the consequences of certain choices. He's seen timelines where he grows up to be different versions of himself, from successful to completely broken. The show also features frequent flashbacks that may or may not be real, creating another layer of unreality. Characters describe events from the past that clearly didn't happen as described, using historical figures and events as props for jokes. These flashbacks create a fictional history that runs parallel to real history, where Griffin ancestors participated in major historical events and shaped the world in absurd ways. The chicken fights between Peter and Ernie the giant chicken represent another form of alternate reality, or at least alternate physics. These fights last for minutes, are destroying huge portions of Quahog through explosive action sequences that parody action movies. Buildings collapse, vehicles explode, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in property damage accumulates. Then the next episode shows Quahog completely restored, with no explanation for how it was repaired or who paid for it. These fights began when Peter found an expired coupon in Ernie's restaurant and blamed Ernie for the problem. Since then, they've fought multiple times, each battle escalating in scope and destruction. The fights seem to exist outside normal reality, paused between regular episodes where their conflict can play out without affecting ongoing storylines. Characters sometimes reference the fights, but rarely seem concerned about the massive damage they cause. The multiverse concept allows the show to explore versions of characters that reveal hidden aspects of their personalities. In the universe where dogs rule humans, Brian is shocked to see himself as the pet, rather than the master. In the Disney universe, characters become sanitized versions of themselves, demonstrating how much of their identity is tied to being crude and inappropriate. These alternate versions serve as mirrors, reflecting back what the characters are by showing what they're not. The show has also featured Christmas specials that exist in unclear relationship to regular continuity. In some Christmas episodes, characters acknowledge that previous Christmas episodes happened. In others, they seem to experience Christmas for the first time, despite celebrating it in earlier seasons. The floating timeline creates confusion about how much time passes between episodes and whether past events actually occurred in the current continuity. The show's evolution and meta-commentary Family Guy's relationship with its own existence has become increasingly self-aware over its 2-decade run. The show regularly breaks the fourth wall, comments on its own quality, acknowledges criticisms, and engages in meta-humor that requires viewers to understand the show's production history and cultural impact. The cancellation and resurrection of Family Guy fundamentally changed how the show approached storytelling. Before cancellation, the writers created episodes assuming they had limited time to make an impact. After resurrection, knowing the show had survived death once gave them confidence to push boundaries and experiment with format, Aunt the episode FG, the untold story directly addressed the cancellation, with characters discussing what the family did during the hiatus and making jokes about the show being off the air. The show frequently references its own controversial moments and acknowledges criticisms. Episodes have featured characters complaining about the show's over-reliance on cutaway gags, its tendency to drag jokes too long, or its use of offensive humor. Rather than defending these choices, the show incorporates the criticism into the comedy, demonstrating awareness of its own flaws while continuing to engage in the exact behavior being criticized. The cutaway gag, Family Guy's signature storytelling device, has been both celebrated and condemned. These random flashbacks or hypothetical scenarios interrupt the main plot to deliver jokes that have no connection to the story. Early critics argued these gags showed lazy writing, allowing writers to throw random jokes at the audience without developing coherent narratives. Defenders argued the cutaways showcased creative freedom, allowing the show to comment on anything without being constrained by plot. Over time, the show has experimented with reducing or eliminating cutaways in certain episodes, demonstrating it can sustain narratives without relying on this crutch. Episodes like Brian and Stewie feature zero cutaways, forcing the show to maintain audience interest through character development and dialogue alone. These experiments prove that Family Guy can function without its most recognizable feature, i.e. even if most episodes continue using cutaways because they remain effective and popular. The show's political content has evolved alongside American political discourse. Early Family Guy engaged in relatively gentle political satire, making jokes about both parties and treating politics as one of many targets for humor. Modern Family Guy has become more explicitly liberal, with Brian serving as a mouthpiece for progressive political views and conservative characters portrayed as stupid or evil. This political shift has alienated some viewers while attracting others. The show walks a difficult line, trying to maintain broad appeal while taking increasingly firm political stances. Episodes addressing hot-button issues like gun control, abortion, or immigration feature genuine advocacy for liberal positions rather than balanced satire, and this represents a significant change from the show's early ethos of attacking all sides equally. The show's relationship with censorship and standards has been contentious throughout its run. Fox has occasionally demanded changes to episodes, cutting content deemed too offensive or inappropriate. The show has fought back against censorship, while also occasionally self-censoring to avoid battles that can't be won. This tension between creative freedom and network restrictions creates an ongoing negotiation about what's acceptable on broadcast television. DVD releases and streaming platforms have allowed the show to release uncensored versions of episodes, adding back content that was cut from broadcast. These uncensored versions reveal just how much gets removed from the average episode, from additional sexual content to more extreme violence to jokes that push racial or religious boundaries too far for network television. The show has addressed criticism about its treatment of Meg directly in several episodes. Characters acknowledge that they abuse Meg, with some episodes suggesting this abuse serves a psychological function for the family. This meta-commentary doesn't excuse the abuse or make it less disturbing. If anything, it makes the situation worse by establishing that the family knows exactly what they're doing to Meg and chooses to continue. Family Guy's influence on television comedy has been significant, inspiring numerous imitators and changing expectations about what adult animation can achieve. Shows like American Dad, also created by Seth MacFarlane, and The Cleveland Show, a short-lived Family Guy spin-off, are directly descended from Family Guy's success. Other animated series have adopted similar styles of humor, cutaway gags, and willingness to push boundaries. The show's longevity has allowed it to comment on its own aging. Episodes feature jokes about how long the show has been on the air, how characters haven't aged despite decades passing in real time, and how certain aspects of the show feel dated or tired. This self-deprecating humor acknowledges that Family Guy isn't as fresh or innovative as it once was, while asserting that it remains relevant and entertaining. The floating timeline creates unique storytelling challenges and opportunities. Characters can reference current events from 2024, while also referencing events from the 1990s, as if both happened recently, and this temporal flexibility allows the show to comment on contemporary culture without being bound by chronological consistency. But it also creates confusion about character histories and relationships, as backstories contradict each other depending on when episodes were written. The show's relationship with Fox Broadcasting has been complex. Fox cancelled the show, brought it back, supported it through controversies, and profited enormously from its success. But Fox has also restricted the show, demanded changes, and occasionally seemed uncomfortable with some of the content they're airing. This tension between creative team and network reflects broader debates about artistic freedom versus corporate responsibility. The merchandising and commercialization of Family Guy has created its own metatextual layer, while the show that started as an edgy alternative to The Simpsons now has action figures, video games, mobile apps, and countless other products. This mainstream success contradicts the show's outsider identity, creating a paradox where Family Guy is simultaneously rebellious and establishment, underground and mainstream. The voice acting setup, with Seth MacFarlane voicing multiple main characters, creates interesting dynamics in episodes where those characters interact extensively. MacFarlane essentially has conversations with himself, requiring careful editing and performance to maintain distinct characterizations. The show occasionally acknowledges this, with characters commenting on how certain voices sound similar, or making jokes about the actor performing multiple roles. The show's treatment of continuity has become progressively looser over time. Early seasons maintained some consistency in character relationships and past events. Modern seasons treat each episode as essentially standalone, with major events forgotten by the next week and character development reset between episodes. This episodic approach allows maximum flexibility, but prevents the kind of long-term character growth that defines prestige television. Family Guy exists in a strange space in television history. It's been on the air long enough to be considered a classic, influential enough to have changed animated comedy, and controversial enough to generate ongoing debate about its value and impact. Whether it represents the best or worst of American comedy depends entirely on who you ask and which episodes you're discussing. The show contains multitudes, capable of genuine emotional moments and thoughtful satire alongside crude jokes and offensive stereotypes. Conclusion: the world of Family Guy extends far beyond what appears in any single episode. It's built on decades of continuity, contradictions, retcons, and revelations that create a surprisingly deep mythology for a show primarily focused on making people laugh at inappropriate jokes. From Peter Griffin's mysterious birth in Mexico to the alternate universes Stewie explores with Brian, from Quahog's founding myths to the complicated relationships between characters, Family Guy has constructed a fictional universe rich with detail and dense with lore. Understanding this lore doesn't necessarily make the show funnier or more meaningful, but it does reveal the care and thought that goes into maintaining a consistent world, even when individual episodes seem random and disconnected. The writers have built a foundation that allows them to tell almost any story while maintaining the essential character of Quahog and its residents. The Griffin family remains at the center of this universe, dysfunctional and damaged, but somehow persisting through countless catastrophes. Their house at 31 Spooner Street has become as iconic as 742 Evergreen Terrace or the Central Perk coffee shop, a fictional location that feels real to millions of viewers who've spent decades visiting it weekly. Whether you love Family Guy or hate it, whether you find it brilliant or offensive, there's no denying its impact on television and popular culture, and the show that premiered after the Super Bowl in 1999 is still going strong over 20 seasons later, still finding new ways to shock, amuse, and occasionally move its audience. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Family Guy lore, make sure you're subscribed to the Cartoon Codex. Hit that like button, share this with fellow animation fans, and let me know in the comments which Family Guy character or storyline you'd like to see explored in more detail. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.